today's video I will be talking about an experiment which was conducted in the 1930s in order to explore the causes of stuttering. So what causes stuttering? Is it because of genetics or is it learned behavior? Dr. Wendell Johnson, a strong proponent of general semantics and professor at the University of Iowa in the 1930s, was one of the most influential speech pathologists in his area. Dr. Johnson himself used to stutter, and he strongly believed that it is a learned behavior influenced by the environment, such as parents' criticism of their child's slightest of stammering. As an undergraduate at the University of Iowa, he used various techniques to overcome this affliction, such as self-analysis, writing, public speaking, and forced vocalizing. In the process, he obtained a degree in English, a master's in psychology in 1929, and a doctorate in psychology in 1931. Johnson's aim was to investigate and devote his life to speech therapy so as to help children overcome the same adversity. Dr. Johnson wanted to show that the prevailing theories about the cause of stuttering were wrong. During the 1930s, he was told that stuttering had an organic or genetic cause. Dr. Johnson had different ideas and suggested an experiment which has since been known as the monster study. The monster study was a stuttering experiment that was conducted by Wendell Johnson, who selected one of his own students, Mary Tudor, to conduct the experiment. In this study, Johnson gathered 22 orphan children and divided them into two separate groups. None of the children were told of the experiment. Instead, they were told that they were going to receive speech therapy. Included in the 22 were 10 children who were identified by the orphanage personnel as being stutterers. The children were divided into two groups, with 5 of the stutterers in one group and 5 in the other group. The other children were randomly allocated to the two groups. The groups were known as Group A and Group B. Between January and late May 1939, Mary Tudor met with each child for 45 minutes every few weeks. During the course of the experiment, normal speakers were given positive encouragement, but it was the treatment of the other group that has made the experiment notorious. The group labeled stutterers were made more self-conscious about stuttering. They were lectured about stuttering and told to take extra care not to repeat words. This negative speech therapy left a mark on the psyche of the children, who were constantly belittled for speech imperfections. Although it did not make them all stutterers, they all became more reserved and were embarrassed to speak even to their peers, and this affected their performance throughout their lives. So Group A was labeled normal speakers, and the children in this group were told that their speech was fine and that they did not stutter. In Mary Tudor's words, they were told that they will outgrow the stuttering and that they will be able to speak even better than they were speaking at the time. She also told them not to pay any attention to what others said about their speaking ability. In general, the children in Group A were praised no matter what they did. In contrast, the children of Group B, the group labeled stutterers, were told that they were stutterers and were belittled for each speech imperfection. They were deliberately demoralized and were insulted for even the slightest error in speech, sometimes even when they didn't make an error. In Tudor's own words, these children were told that the staff has come to the conclusion that they have a great deal of trouble with their speech, that they may have symptoms of a child who is beginning to stutter, and they were also told to not ever speak unless they can do it right. After her second session with 5-year-old Norma Jean, Tudor wrote, "It was very difficult to get her to speak, although she spoke very freely the month before." Another in the group, 9-year-old Betty Rump, practically refuses to talk, a researcher wrote in his final evaluation. Hazel Potter, 15, the oldest in her group, became much more conscious of herself and talked less, Tudor noted. Potter also began to interject and to snap her fingers in frustration. Another orphan, Mary Corlask, a 12-year-old, grew withdrawn. During their sessions, Tudor asked whether her best friend knew about her stuttering, and she answered no. When Mary asked why not, she shuffled her feet and said that she hardly ever talks to her. 2 years later, Corlask ran away from the orphanage and eventually ended up at the rougher industrial school for girls, simultaneously escaping her human experimentation. Of the 6 normal or non-stuttering children in the stutterers group, 5 began stuttering after the negative therapy. Of the 5 children in Group B who had stuttered before the therapy, 3 became worse. In comparison, only 1 of the children in the group labeled normal or Group A had greater speech problems after the study. The findings of the study supported Johnson's hypothesis and contributed to a new and successful way of treating people with stuttering. Although the results of the studies were available in the University of Iowa library, they were never published. It is believed that Johnson chose to do so on the advice of colleagues who questioned the ethics of his methods. Sadly for the children, there was inadequate post-study counseling and therapy. The unethical consequences of the study rested until 2001 when an investigative reporter for the San Jose Mercury News wrote a series of articles about the study and published a book evaluating the study. 6 remaining children of Group B sued the state of Iowa for lifelong psychological and emotional scarring caused by the study. They complained of ongoing negative psychological effects, learning disabilities, and in some cases speech problems. Although none had become stutterers, the evidence was that they had become self-conscious and unwilling to speak. So how should one view this study? On the one hand, the person carrying it out thought that they were doing the right thing and were motivated by a desire to do good. There were no restrictions or guidelines on human experimentation at the time, and even in the second half of the 20th century, there were numerous funded studies using humans. On the other hand, the children had no say in the experiment, and as they were not told of the experiment and were misled into believing they were receiving therapy. The fact that the study was never published, notwithstanding the long-term damage caused to the children and inadequate follow-up, makes the study even more unethical. There still remains no single agreed-upon cause for stuttering or the most appropriate therapy. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and like it, and let us know in the comment section below what you thought about this study and what do you think about us making videos like this one in the future.